Hello and welcome to Moving Pictures Kenya. Today, I'm taking you behind the scenes to what was happening during the COVID-19 pandemic. I have a conversation with Kenya's #1 frontline worker. I like to call her the Iron Lady of infectious diseases. She fought and defeated Ebola in West Africa in a project called Africans for Africa. She was the person who handled the first COVID case in Kenya. Her name is Edna Margaret Ogonga, Head of State Commendation. She got this commendation for her efforts to fight infectious diseases not only in Kenya but in Africa. My name is Bonventure and this is Moving Pictures Kenya, connecting people, inspiring Africa. This is a conversation you cannot afford to miss. Maggie, thank you so much for accepting to talk to us today. We wanted to have a conversation just trying to relook at what happened during the COVID times. So maybe you can start by introducing yourself and then you tell us, because there was a time the president made an announcement that the first COVID case was in Kenya. So you can take us to what was happening before that announcement.
Okay, my name is Margaret Ogonga. I'm a nurse, RN in York, Pennsylvania. I was an infectious diseases nurse prior coming to this country. So I was working in infectious diseases unit, Kenyatta National Hospital, which is the biggest referral hospital in Kenya. So I remember it was March 13th, 2021. The president announced COVID was in Kenya. And it was a shocker for everybody because we had been hearing about it in other countries, but it had now reached our country. So prior this, there was COVID preparedness. I remember the president saying we need to have a facility within 7 days. I, being the first nurse to open our COVID unit in Kenyatta National Hospital, it was a 6-bed capacity, and we're just taking these other infectious diseases like measles, chickenpox, and multi-drug resistant infections just to keep up and make the unit continue functioning. But now, seeing the magnitude of COVID in other countries, the president thought it wise to have a bigger facility. So a ground was set in a previous maternity unit at Mbagathi Hospital. The unit was granted to Kenyatta National Hospital and we were told to open it within 7 days. I remember me and my senior worked there. We were working almost 18 hours a day because we had to meet the deadlines, and the unit had to be of standard of an infectious diseases unit. And thankfully we were able to set up the unit. So the unit stayed idle until the 13th because we were having suspects. People were coming in, and that time it was anybody from China. We were not thinking of other countries. It was somebody who has traveled in from China. So we were getting a few people from China, testing them. The tests were going to South Africa because we didn't have a testing unit in Kenya. And results were taking a while, like a week, and people were turning negative. So I remember one afternoon I was in the unit, the main unit at Kenyatta National Hospital. A colleague, we had put one person aside to stay just at the other unit at Mbagathi, like in case people decide to come in. And she called me and told me, there's a lady who has come in and she says she has symptoms. Then I asked her, like, where had she traveled from? She said she had traveled from the United States. And I was like, she doesn't meet the criteria. We tried calling the ministry, we were unable to reach them. Then we said, let's take a risk. So we took an ambulance, dressed up, went, interviewed her, and she said she had traveled from the United States of America and she felt like she had some sore throat and everything. So because she was the only one, we decided to like take her to the one in Mbagathi because the other one was almost a 60-bed capacity. So we dressed up, took her to Kenyatta National Hospital, the COVID unit. And I remember as we were walking down the hallway, I was telling her like, I don't think you'll turn positive because you don't meet the criteria for China. So we settled her and I took my off and went home. So on this date I was off because I was processing some documents for coming to this place. I remember I was just leaving my house to take my children for their fingerprints for passports. And checking my phone, I had like 20 missed calls, and I was like, what is happening? And somebody asked me, Maggie, have you watched the news? And I was like, nope. When I looked at the screen, I saw first patient has tested positive in Kenya. And when I picked up my phone, it was Dr. Lois. She was the infectious disease coordinator in Kenya, and she was asking me, Maggie, there's this patient, were you fully dressed when you handled her? Were you fully protected? Was everybody protected? We're trying to call everybody in who had handled her. And I aborted my journey for going to Nyayo House for the passports, and my husband went with the kids, and I went straight to Kenyatta. So while there, we were getting calls. Some people were saying we are now not allowed to go home because we were exposed. People were asking us, were you having your gowns on when you handled her? At that point, we had two patients. We had a Kenyan and a Nigerian, and we were like, which of the two are you guys talking about? But when they announced a 27-year-old, I was sure it's the lady who had come from the United States of America. So there was back and forth. They kept saying, we'll go to hotels, we'll not go home. And then at some point we were told, guys, I think you guys are safe. Go home, but if you feel you have symptoms, come call us or call the ministry. So we all went back home. We were like a group of 10. And that was the way we handled the first case of COVID-19 in Kenya. So the following day, on the 14th, the Ministry of Health went to Rongai. This lady was living in Rongai, and they had a function and a party, like, because she had just traveled back from the States. And they took all the youths, I'd call them now are they called Gen 7? The Gen 7, the Gen Zs in Kenya now, because they were that age of 19 to 25, 27. And they were all now brought to Magadi because they were approximately around 30. So they came in. We were told they all have to get tested before we release them out because they were contacts of the lady. So the test was still taking a while. So it took 2-3 days. On the third day, they started getting anxious. Knowing the youths, they decided to storm out of the facility. They all went to the field and they were like, if we are not getting our results, we are going out.
So all this while they had been kept at the hospital?
Yes, they had been at the hospital for like now 4 days. And now they started getting anxious, agitated, and they broke out of the facility, went to the field, and they were like, if we are not getting our results, we are going home. And somebody sent us the results, and out of the results there was one positive boy. And now the challenge was, I have these 30 youths. They are all over the field, and I don't know who this positive person is. So at this point, they were taking videos and posting them on social media, like what they are doing. You just know the youths. So I decided, like, I called them and told everybody, bring your bags, you guys are going home, but I need to give you your results, because I wanted to know who this positive person was. So as I was reading the names, people were taking videos, and I was like, I hope you're not taking videos and you might be the positive one and expose yourself to people. So when I called the name of the boy, I knew who he was. I called all the others and I told them, now you guys, you're allowed to leave. But when they were about to leave, I pulled him aside and I told him, Brian, you're not going home. And he asked me why. He thought because he was one of the people taking the videos, he was getting arrested or something. I told him, we have one positive patient, and the positive person is you. The boy was traumatized. I counseled him. We called the ambulance, took him, because now we only had 2 positive people. We couldn't still keep him in the facility that is a 60-bed capacity. So we also now took him to Kenyatta National Hospital COVID unit. And at that time now we had 2 positive patients.
So what was this about COVID that was terrifying people so much?
We were seeing from other countries the way people were dying in numbers. And it took a while for COVID to come to Africa. And everybody was like, there's something about Africans with COVID. So we were like, our infrastructure, if what is happening in the United States, the UK happens to us, we will like all die, because people thought we were not prepared to manage such a magnitude of a disease or such numbers.
Yeah, because people are talking about our food, you know, the way we walk to work, so that's why we were not being affected.
Yeah, that was the notion that people were talking about, but I just think it was, we don't travel a lot, Africans, and people don't travel into our country a lot. And that time, most of the flights had been banned into coming into Kenya, so I think that protected us for a time, for some while, before it now hit us.
So, you know, you've talked about dressing up. Maybe can you tell us what it means by dressing up? And then, of course, when the patient's in hospital, so you now dressed up that way, how did they feel?
Okay, there is called donning and doffing. Donning is putting on the PPEs. You are seeing those white suits you are putting on with masks and the goggles and the boots. That's what we call dressing up. So before you handle any suspicious person, you are supposed to be fully covered so that you don't infect yourself.
You've talked about being the first person, you know, to test those boys, and you've said you had dressed up. So now going home, how did your family receive you now that they knew you had come into contact?
Yes, and that I think is the worst, because if somebody sees you on telly, people see you working in that place, people would sideline you. But I think my family was okay with it, because this was not the first time I was handling an infectious disease. My only worry was my husband, because they were saying this thing was hitting the immunocompromised people. And my husband being diabetic for many years, my only worry was me infecting him, because they had claimed the people with compromised immunities, like people with diabetes, people with hypertension, cancer, and all those kind of things, if they would get the COVID, their process wouldn't go well. Most of them were not making it. So my only worry was my husband. So when I got home, I would take a shower. I had my own specific seat where I would sit on my own. I was using my own disposable plates, cups, and spoons. And I even had to move out of my matrimonial bed because I was worried I would infect him. But my family was understanding.
But considering that you are the one, you know, in Africa, it's women who prepare the food. So did at one point your children feel uncomfortable taking the food prepared by you now that you had been exposed?
Luckily, I would say I was working longer hours during that time, because we were working around 15, 17 hours. There was curfew, and I remember we used to be dropped home because curfew used to get us at work. So what helped me was I had a house help. So I decided like to delegate all the cooking and everything else to her. So it gave me some limitation with my family and the children. So I would come in, I would have a special bucket for my clothes. I would find when my water is ready. I would take my bath, clean the bathroom before I now interact with them.
Okay. Now talking of curfew, because there was curfew and then there was contact tracing.
Yeah.
So all those things that were happening during this time, what was it all about, especially the contact tracing?
Anytime we got somebody positive, we would go and grab all the people living around the person. Like if I would have tested positive in my family, my children, my husband would have been taken into quarantine. They would be tested, and at the beginning they would be told to stay for 21 days before they are released. Things later changed, and it was like if you're tested, if I have the first test, you go home. But before then, it was like they would go to the villages, they would go to the estates, and if somebody is positive, they would bring the whole family into the unit, and the family would stay with us for 21 days. When they test negative is when we now we are releasing them. But when the numbers became big, we were not able to accommodate them, because imagine if we had 10 families and each family has 5 or 10 contacts, that's almost 100 people. And then we also realized we were mixing them up. Okay, we had one side of the unit where we had the people who were negative, and one side was for the positive. So all of them would mingle on this side, and if somebody turns positive on the negative side, would take the person from the negative side and take to the positive side. So the mingling between the negatives and the positives, because we did not know the status of these other people, was also worrying. So it was decided, if we would test you positive, we would tell you, go home, stay, don't go to work, don't mingle with people, but stay in your house. So the whole thing changed after a while.
Okay. Now take us through the level of preparedness, because you know those days, we as people who are not in the medical field, we are being told that most nurses, if they hear or see a patient they suspect is COVID, or even coughing or sneezing, they'll run away. So I don't know what level of preparedness had you gone through?
I would say Kenya was prepared, because Kenya had invested over 179 medics who had gone to West Africa during the Ebola. So they had a database with all these people. So I would think like the fact that we tackled Ebola, we had people who had, Ebola was even worse than COVID. So we had people who were like on the database, like in case of an outbreak or anything, they were there. So when this happened, they just had to take these people in their database and be taken to specific places to start opening other specific units. Okay, the other medics who had not tackled any infectious diseases like Ebola were scared. But with the help of these 172 Ebola warriors, it helped the government, because I think the volunteering was an investment to the country.
Okay. So now talking about Ebola, I think you need to take us through that process, because I read somewhere that you are part of the team that went to West Africa to fight Ebola. So when you were on that plane going to West Africa, what was going through your mind?
Okay, I would say when I was in KNH, I was working in pediatric emergency. So somebody brought an advert from the newspaper and was like, volunteering to go to West Africa for Ebola. This was in July. And we applied as a joke, like we were not serious about it. And then that was July. Then August, September, October, they sent us papers to do medicals, and we were like, I think it's just formality. We did our medicals. Then September, October, November, I remember December 31st, we got an email. And that's when the reality hit us, that we are going out, because the email read, African Union is coming to Kenya on the 5th to vet your papers and sign your contract. This is 31st December. They are coming on the 5th of January to vet our papers. Then they said 5th, then 6th, 7th, 8th, it will be vetting and training. Then on the 9th, you'll be traveling. Like we were ambushed. So we didn't even have time like to say, I am not doing it. Because we had 9 days from the day we got the emails, to doing our medicals and to flying out. So African Union came in, we were at Sarova, they vetted our papers. At that time we were confused. We were wondering, are we going on our own or are we government sponsored? And then later we were given letters and told, you don't even have to go back to work and tell your bosses you're leaving. The government will go to your places of work and tell them you are leaving, because when you work for the ministry or for the government, you have to ask for permission to leave. So the government told us, because we are the governments, we are the ones sending you guys out, we are the ones who will talk to the hospital, specific hospitals where you work, to tell them that you are leaving. So within 3 days you had to sort your family, sign contracts, and we had a small mini training and travel. I remember we were signing insurance contract, and it said if you would go there and not make it, your family would be given some amount of money and you are writing your next of kin. And I remember people were saying we were signing our death sentence, because everybody knew we were all not going to come back. So So on that morning, I remember it was the 9th, we went to State House, had breakfast with the president, had a convoy, and took the flight. I remember I was with my best friend. She was called Zedi, and when the flight went up, we all just looked back and was like, there is no turning back. Because that time there were no flights, and African Union chartered a flight for us with Kenya Airways to take us to West Africa. So I just remember when we took off, we all just looked at each other and we were like, this is it. So the flight was 8 hours to Ghana. Then from Ghana, it was like 2 hours to West Africa. I went to Liberia. There's a group that went to Sierra Leone. And I remember Liberia being a growing country. When we arrived, the airport was in a deserted area. It was dark, there were no lights. And it was like 40 kilometers to Monrovia, which is the capital city. So we alighted, it was dark. We had cars and vehicles waiting for us. We were taken, driven to the city, had our dinner, and booked in hotels. And that is when but our surprise was when we got to the city, all this life was normal. Like, people were doing their business, the cities were full. We were expecting the cities to be deserted from the videos we had seen earlier of people dying everywhere in the streets. But when we got to the city, we were like, life was normal, people were minding their own business, and we mingled in. So we went into hotels, slept before now we started the main job the following day.
Okay. I remember this project was called Africans for Africa.
Yes.
So, and you as a frontline warrior, so what were you armed with? Going now, as a frontline warrior, you are going to a war zone. In this particular case, we are going to fight Ebola.
Just I said I was a pediatric nurse because I was working in pediatric emergency. So I had done nothing to do with infectious diseases. So the 2 days, the 7th and the 8th, we were just given brief training in Kenya. And then when we got there, we had a training by WHO. It was a 2-week training. We had a cold training and hot training. Cold training was practicals without a live patient. Then hot training was training in a CTU. That is a unit where there are now real patients suffering from Ebola.
That was in Kenya or in West Africa?
In West Africa.
Okay.
So we did a 2-week training before now we were released to the Ebola facilities.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when now you go to the Ebola facilities, how did the people receive, the patients or the people receive you?
When we got there, most of the hospitals had been closed. Liberia being a country that was just coming up, people were dying, so all their hospitals were closed down, and what was there were just the CTUs, which were the units that were taking the Ebola people. So these people were very receptive because they saw we had come to help them out. So we were all distributed. Some people stayed in the city, some people stayed in, some people were taken to the villages. And some people were given offices, like they were told to manage the offices. Like I was now a coordinator, I was like a communication officer on the Foreign Affairs Office. I was the go-between the African Union, the government of Liberia, and the Ebola warriors. Like I would now go to each facility, ensure people are distributed well, ensure they have everything they need. If somebody is sick, I would do contact tracing and all those kind of things. So different people were taken to different facilities. Some people were taken to Monrovia, some people were taken to the villages, and some people were taken to hospitals that had been closed down. Because despite them dying of Ebola, they were also dying of this normal disease. Liberia being a country that is prevalent to malaria, Ebola symptoms were like malaria symptoms. But now the country was concentrating on Ebola and forgetting that these people had other illnesses. So part of the group went and opened other facilities that had been closed down. like other hospitals had been closed down. So some of us went, opened the facilities, opened the hospitals, and started just doing the normal functions which were not Ebola related. Like some of the doctors started doing surgeries, seeing other patients with other ailments that were not Ebola related. But before that, for a whole month or two, we were basically dealing with the Ebola patients.
Okay. So from your experience in West Africa, in Liberia, is there a moment that you can sit down and say, yes, this was the moment and I'm proud of this moment? Is there anything that you did that makes you proud to this day?
Yes. I remember the first time when we got, I think it was psychological, we all felt like we had symptoms. Anytime you would cough, you'd feel like you're having Ebola. Anytime you'd have a stomach upset, you'd feel like you have it. And we also had culture shock, because the kind of food they were eating is totally different from what we were eating back home. They had things called bushmeat. They were eating monkeys, they were eating snails, they were eating lizards. And for us to like integrate and be able to get into the system and eat what they were eating, we were also scared. So I think that was one of the points. The second point was mingling with these people made us more confident, because we were able to see these people live doing the things they were doing, and it gave us confidence. And African Union used to come frequently to check on us, to check on how we are doing. And we also used to have continuous training, like because it was mutating. When it mutates, they would come and tell us, like, this time we need to do this thing differently from what we did last time. Just the same way, when COVID came in first, the first people didn't die, and people were like, these two people were just sure they didn't really have COVID, but they really had COVID. And people would see people on the COVID units dancing, doing stuff, and Kenyans were like, the government is tricking us. But for real, they were positive, but they were not severe symptoms. But when the real COVID came, the one that was called Delta, people were now dying. So the virus had mutated into a virus that was killing people. So the same way with Ebola, the virus kept mutating and the numbers of deaths went down, is the same way with COVID. Like in Kenya, I would really say it was so traumatizing when people started dying, because you'd be talking to somebody now and in the next 5 minutes, the person would be dead. They were suffering from air hunger, in that all these people who were having the Delta needed to be in ventilation machines. I remember we only had 11. So with all this population and 11 ventilators, it was not possible to handle them. Secondly, we didn't have CCTV cameras in the room. So I would go into the room, look at the patient, talk to the patient, and leave. By the time I'm going back there next, because maybe her oxygen or something has gone down, I would find this person dead. So all we would do is go around using the windows and peep and be like, are you feeling okay? Are you doing fine? Because Kenya, as a growing country, we had not invested even on CCTV cameras to see how these people were in their rooms. And they would tell us, like, take the minimal time you'd take with these people so that you don't infect yourselves, because the PPEs were also not comfortable. So the same way COVID mutated is the same way Ebola mutated. It became slightly friendlier, the virus went down, and people stopped dying. And that's why we have people called the Ebola survivors. But they still said, being an Ebola survivor, you are still infectious, because they said somebody could still get it through blood transfusion, through sex and semen, and all those kind of things. So I think what we underwent in Ebola, because Ebola was that fatal, armored us to work well when Delta hit in.
Okay. Yeah. So when you were in Liberia, did it ever dawn to you that either you or one of your colleagues could die of Ebola? And did it ever happen?
Fortunately, none of us died. And I think it's from the training that we had received. And none of us was also infected. Okay. And it's all about protection, and that's why we kept talking about PPEs, with advanced and adequate PPEs, less people would get infected. And that was the same thing with COVID. Good PPEs, standard PPEs, not fake ones, would protect the health workers from getting either the Ebola or the COVID-19.
Now, I want you to tell us about your coming back from Liberia. When your mission was over and you are told now you're going back home. First of all, how long was the mission in Liberia?
The mission was 6 months. We came back in June. I remember when we arrived, I would really recommend and I would really say the former President Uhuru was very nice, because everybody was like, you guys are infected. You shouldn't come back and mingle with people. But I remember we arrived and went to State House. We shook his hand. So what if we were positive? We were going to infect the president. But like, he believed in us. And when we arrived at the airport, we got vehicles waiting for us and we were taken straight to State House. We shook hands and dined with the president. And then after that, we were like, there's no quarantine, you guys just need to go home and watch in case you have symptoms, because by the time we were leaving there, all of us were negative. And that is when the president was like, he gave us awards, and the awards were head of state commendations. So I am Margaret Ogonga HSC.
Okay, congratulations.
Thank you. And the same president also organized with African Union, who still gave us a commendation from the African Union. So we had 2 awards from the African Union and from the head of state, who was President Uhuru at that time.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, talking about Uhuru, you know, many people have said many things about him, but you being a frontline worker and knowing how COVID affected the country, what is this that you think Uhuru did right?
Okay, Kenya being a third world country, I think the president really tried, because him setting up that facility and ensuring like the health workers were getting their PPEs. Kenya started manufacturing PPEs from their own factories, so that we didn't have any shortages. That was a plus for President Uhuru. Secondly, he identified a few people who had done extraordinarily well. I remember I still got a second award from him, and it's called Uzalendo Award. That award was related now to COVID. The HSC was related to Ebola, and the Uzalendo Award was related to COVID-19. So he tried, because we were able to get enough PPEs, we were able to get enough training, and we were able to be supported by the Ministry of Health.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think, Mangi, as we continue, if you allow me, you'll give me a number so that I share on your screen when I post this story, so that if anybody feels like they want to support you through the medical process of your husband, can send something to that number. Okay. I don't know whether that is okay.
It's okay.
Okay. So now at this moment, what is it that you can tell President Uhuru, retired president?
He was one in a million. He would mingle with anybody and everybody. He was a president who would, just the way I said, we shook his hands. We went to State House, we dined, which was something rare for for any of the presidents to do that. Even just despite the medics, you would see Uhuru mingling with the children, Uhuru in the streets of Nairobi. Uhuru would came to the COVID unit to open it, and he still shook our hands. He didn't fear that we would infect him. When we still arrived, we went to State House, dined with him and the wife, and he was not scared of us. Like, he literally supported us 100%.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, now let us go to the point of losing patients. So for you as a medic, when you lose a patient or when you lost patients during COVID, how did you feel, especially now that they appear to be in good health, but the next minute they are not there?
That was the most traumatizing thing ever, because I would cry. I would say, once you tested positive for COVID, the link between you and your family was cut. It was you and the medics. If you didn't have a supporting medic or a supporting medical system, you would die, because these people were dying alone and lonely. You're not able to see your family. You're not able to see your children. You're not able to see your friends. All we could do is see the nurses or the medics donned. You'll not even be able to identify this as Margaret, this as whoever. Because I'll just come in and introduce myself and tell you, I am Margaret. I'm here to give you your meds. How are you feeling today? And I'm all down. You don't know whether I am black, white, whether I have white hair, whether I am young or old. So Delta people died lonely. And the way they were being buried was also not really pleasing. First things first, you die lonely. Then secondly, you are buried within 1 day. They were not giving them time to like mourn with your family or something like that. So I and my colleagues, we really empathized with the patients who had COVID. We would go there, sit down, talk to them, and some would die in your hands. And it was so traumatizing. I remember I cried a couple of times just seeing somebody dying and you're not able to help. And the worst is they were dying out of hunger for air. They needed vents, which we could not afford. Somebody like, just imagine you suffocating. Mm-hmm. Basically, they were suffocating. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. You know, during the time of COVID, many people, especially men, they used to lock themselves in bars and say that no, COVID is not there, these guys are lying to us. And then even some could say, if you take beer, you'll get COVID, but if you take the harder drinks like whiskey or something, then you'll be okay. What is your comment about that?
And that notion of the men locking themselves in the clubs, saying there's no COVID, I would say fortunately and unfortunately, when we began, the ratio of men to women who were positive, men were more than the women. We had many positive men than the women. So at some point, they had now to realize that this thing is real. The women were staying home, locking themselves in the house. The children were at home because the schools had closed for almost a year. But the men now took advantage of it. They were like, we are not paying school fees, so we have extra money to spend. So people were going to clubs, having fun, drinking, and unfortunately, at the beginning, most of those who were affected were the men. But at some point, it now came like the numbers were the same, but at the beginning, we had more infected men than the women.
Okay. Yeah. So if COVID was to happen again, what do you think people should do differently?
If COVID was to happen again, today, I would say, let's accept and believe it exists. Because people were like, the government is out to get money, the government is lying that there is COVID and there is no COVID. I remember when the 2 first and second COVID patients were brought to the screen, people were like, this is just a show. It has been stage managed. I managed those 2 people. And people trolled them and said it was a lie. It wasn't a lie. Those were the first 2 positive COVID people in Kenya. But that's why I was saying the first variant was not as fatal as the second variant, which was now Delta. And that's why we were seeing people, just as I had said prior, dancing in Kisumu, like they're in the COVID units and they're dancing and all that kind of thing. But in real sense, COVID was there, and anytime we are told there is an infectious disease somewhere, people need to act and not assume that it is propaganda. Yeah.
And then one of the things that made people really believe that COVID existed was when so many medics died in the month of, I think, November or December in 2020.
Yes.
You know, people like Dr. Isi, Dr. Lushula.
Yeah. That is when we had the Delta.
So what happened such that these doctors had to die at that time?
It's called selflessness, because people were working selflessly to help the Kenyans. And I'd say maybe Kenyans appreciated us for what we did. President Uhuru appreciated us for what we did. And this thing was killing both the old and the young doctors. And being a variant, nobody was understanding. If the Americans, the British were not understanding what this was all about, us as Africans, a third world country, it was even worse for us. So people were working longer hours. People were working with, I remember at some point we were getting slightly substandard PPEs. And it reached a point when now the government decided that before we get any PPEs, us, the users, need to go and vet them out. And I think at that point that also helped. But before we were just getting substandard PPEs and people were assuming that these masks are right. Apparently those masks were leaking. So that is the time many medics got infected and many medics died.
Oh, so it was because of the equipment, some of the equipment you used?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
But there was also that notion that so many people were infected and they never knew that they were infected and just healed on their own. Was that possible?
Yes. Even now, people still get COVID. There is still COVID here in the United States, COVID back home. COVID is a flu. It's like what back home we call homa. And when you get the cold, depending on your immunity, you're able to fight it. There are people who will show symptoms and be bedridden, and there are people who will just, it recovers on its own. So I would say even right now, we still have COVID wherever here and back home, but that was it. So at that point, it was Delta. And there are those people who Delta was hitting hard, and there were those people who Delta was hitting mildly, and people were still mingling. And the testing was also, at some point, people started to pay for the tests. So I was like, why should I go and pay 3,000 to have a COVID test and maybe be disappointed? Maybe it's negative or positive. So somebody would have the symptoms but still go to work because he or she wants to continue making her daily bread. So maybe I work in a hotel, I am positive, I get my daily salary as I am paid. I assume if I test positive, I'll be home for 14 days. What will my family eat? So I go to work. If you're a nurse or a medic, you continue going to work and then you get yourself infecting other people. And that is the way it spread.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then you've talked about your husband's illness and you fear that you might have, you could have infected him. But what did he think about himself? Did he worry that my wife is now doing this and I'm at risk?
Nope. My husband believed I am a risk taker. For me to go to West Africa for Ebola, that was taking a risk. And for me also to accept, we were not being forced. It was optional to work in the COVID unit. Nobody was taking ropes and tying you and telling you you have to work there. Nope. They were just talking to us and asking us like, would you really want to continue working there? And at some point, if you felt you were overwhelmed, you were told like, take a break and come back and continue to work. So my husband, knowing I was a risk taker, he was okay with it.
Okay. Now about his sickness, because I know you've been going through a lot of medical issues and bills. What kind of support would you request from people if there is anybody who wants to support you?
Okay, my husband had had childhood diabetes, and diabetes comes with its own complications like the eyes, the legs, the kidneys. So he had diabetes for 35 years, and just before we came here he was in stage 4 end-stage renal disease. When we just got here, he went into end-stage renal disease and was started on dialysis in July 2023, that's last year. I would say that was a journey because he started having the symptoms in January 2023. I went back to the facility I was working in. And that's why I would say sometimes always keep good bridges with where you live. Because when he started getting sick, I went back to where I used to work before, that is Kenyatta National Hospital. They were very receptive to me. My husband started dialysis, but he was tested. He was put for a catheter and he started dialysis. Okay, our first dialysis was done in Kenyatta. Then we decided to do it privately because of the numbers of machines that were in Kenyatta. And on the process, I felt like I think I need to go to India for transplant. And I remember my nephrologist, Dr. Kabinga, and a couple of friends who work in renal unit asked me like, Maggie, you have worked in Kenyatta for 20-something years. You should trust us with your husband. And they also said, if you would go to India today and you complicate over there, when you come back here, who will review your husband? And so immediately he started dialysis. I also started the process for transplant. A few family members were tested. There were those who were willing. There were those who were not willing. There were those whose blood groups were matching. There were those whose blood groups were not matching. But from nowhere, somebody just, a first cousin by the name Florence Wanjiro, she just got out from nowhere. She was not even amongst the group of people we had thought would accept to support my husband. She came forward and said, I will donate my kidney for my cousin. Her mother and my father-in-law are brothers and sisters. She being female, I thought maybe people down there would discourage her because she's a mother of one. There are those notions like, if you donate, you'll not be able to have children, you'll not be able to, like your life will not be normal. She underwent counseling at Kenyatta National Hospital and she said, I'm not turning back. I'm giving my kidney to my cousin. And we started the process. It was quite expensive. There are so many tests that need to be done. We had setbacks because we were being told, okay, it's October, you guys are ready. And then you had to be given a go-ahead by a couple of people like a nephrologist, a urologist, a neurologist, a cardiologist to say you are fit for that surgery. And anytime we went to one, maybe they write your fit. When they go for a multidisciplinary team, they'll be like, do another test. Then we do the test, it comes out positive, it comes out nice, and then the next multidisciplinary meeting, they say again, he needs to have another test. He's fine, then they bring another test. So it was back and forth for a while, but I think it was for his benefit because they wanted to be sure that before he has his surgery, he needs to be physically fit. So his surgery was scheduled for 7th January 2023. No, 2024 this year. And I remember I was not there. My husband worked well for the surgery. I had just come back to see my children here in the United States. And when he got in there, he was fine. But that night, he started having a fever and wheezing. And they were like, okay, we cannot go ahead with the surgery. So the surgery was postponed. And they said now he has to have his dialysis at Kenyatta National Hospital. He did that for 1 month. He was dialyzed. And the way other people have their dialysis sessions and were doing well, it was different from my husband because he used to have low blood pressure. He used to vomit on the machine. He used to have dizziness. He used to dialysis was not going so well with him. He had lost weight and all this was going through on his head. So his surgery was rescheduled to 7th February. Luckily, it was done, it was successful, and we were discharged within the normal 7 days of post-dialysis, post-transplant. He went home, and then when we got home, we had another setback. A week after his surgery, he had a convulsion. When they did a CT scan, they said he had had a stroke, like 2 strokes. So I remember we went still back to Kenyatta National Hospital, renal unit. They were very supportive, and I would say that unit, it's not only about me. Those people are family to all the patients who are undergoing dialysis, stroke transplant. So we were readmitted, and he stayed in the hospital for 14 days. He was not able to eat, not able to sleep, not able to, he was unconscious for like 10 days. He improved. Remember all this, while all this is happening, I have my children here. This is America. If you don't work, you don't have money. There are bills to pay. Bills here are not like the bills back home. You have a car loan to pay, you have a house rent to pay, you have insurance to pay. There's so much to pay here. So when I was going back home, I thought the maximum I was gonna stay was 2 weeks. I stayed for 3 months. I would thank the Kenyan team that was here, because they would visit my children, they would shop for my children, the men would come and talk to my boys, the women would come and talk to my girls, and for the 3 months that I was away, they knew what my children were eating, they knew how part of my bills were being paid. And I don't know, I was so overwhelmed, and it's not that I knew these people before coming to this country. We all just went through a process of doing the exams. We had a group back home called York Welfare Group. We were just like, people who had arrived here earlier were telling people who are coming behind what is happening. So when we got here, we were now a completely new family. So I would say I've only known these people since 2022, maybe part of towards the second half of 2022, but they are my family here. They know when I'm away what my children eat, how my children go to school. They supported my children even with soccer. And I am so overwhelmed about it.
Yeah, at least one thing, because I interact with your children closely, one thing I know about them is that they are really proud of their father. I don't know why that is the case.
Me being married to their father for 22 years, when their dad started ailing, he was a businessman, we changed posts. I continued doing my nursing work and taking care of the family business. And my husband stayed at home to take care of my children. He used to do with them their homework. He used to drive them to school, pick them back from school, and that attachment was so close. To this minute, my children are traumatized with the way their dad is not here. They talk to him every day. When he's unwell, they talk to him. He has had very many complications from this process. I would say even today, he's in hospital. He developed a clot, something called deep venous thrombosis. He was admitted at the renal unit, Kenyatta National Hospital, on Thursday last week, and he's undergoing his treatment over there. Yeah.
I know you've heard very kind words for former President Uhuru, and I know many Kenyans who may watch this video will be touched by your story. So if somebody wants to support you, what kind of support would you want to get from people, especially with your bills and the medical bills?
Okay, I would really recommend President Uhuru, because part of my bill was paid by something called NHIF. There's this new one that is called SHIF. I'm hoping it's still going to be the same for the other people who need this kind of process. Part of my bill was also paid by my friends here and back home in Africa. We had a group, they gave me what they were able to give me. It also helped with the bills. Knowing the anti-rejection meds that these post-transplant patients get after transplant, the meds cost around 50,000 a month. The labs, he's just still in the acute phase post-transplant, so we do labs every week. The lab tests cost around 10,000 a week, and then plus the doctor's consultations. It's expensive, it's an expensive journey, counting that part of me is here. I've been traveling back and forth. I come here, stay for a month, go back to Kenya, stay for a month, come here, stay for a month, go back to Kenya, stay for a month. I am not stable with my bills. But God is gracious. I've been able to survive with the help of my friends and family. And that is the way it is. Okay, just the way I said, I came to this country in April 2022. Me and my family and my children. We've been here since then. My son got here, my oldest. He joined the army here. He's doing well with it. My other children are in school. My second one has just finished high school. He's about to join college. He was playing soccer and God is gracious. He managed to get a scholarship at Central Penn to play soccer and also go to school. And I think that's going to help me with my bills, because when a child gets a scholarship, part of his school fees is paid by the university. And so that has been my journey. I am hoping one day me and my family will be reunited. My husband will be able to join us here so that he can help me support my children, be it financially, spiritually, and physically. I'm also grateful for my work. I work at Wellspan York Hospital for Southwest. I have a second job at Genesis Kingston Court. All the staffs there have been supportive spiritually. People come and ask me, Maggie, how are you doing? When I'm away back in Kenya, they call me, they send emails like, how are you doing? How is your husband doing? It's been a long journey for me and my family, but I know one day this is gonna end.
Okay. Yeah, I know, you've gone through a lot professionally, medically, family-wise, and I know many people have not gone through that experience you've gone through. And I also know that people back home have expectations, and people here have no experience that you have experienced. What would be your message to them?
I would tell people back in Kenya, in America, it's not like Africa. You have to work to get paid. If I fall sick today and don't go to work, I don't get paid for the day I don't go to work. In America, we are not salaried. We are paid per hour. So sometimes people, when you get here, people have the expectation that you are in America, your life is simple, you are living a large life, but it's not the way it is. We work extra hours. You work 16 hours to make ends meet. I was telling somebody the other day, is like, I don't remember the last time I had my casual wear, because it's work, home, pajama, scrubs, work. We rarely have time for social life. It's about, we are here because of our children. We want our children to have a better future compared to the future that is there for the young people in Kenya, where there are no jobs right now. That is why we maybe decided to come here, because I would say I had a job, a good job back home before coming here. And people were like, Maggie, do you think you really need to go to America? Because despite me working at Kenyatta National Hospital, I used to do medical evacuations. I remember my first medical evacuation was Njahmbi Koikai. God rest her soul in peace. I'm the one who brought her to Atlanta, Georgia for her surgery. And she opened ways, because after that she really referred many clients to me. And despite me having that job and having the medvac job, people were like, do you think you really need to go to America? But I was like, I have my children, and my children need a future. And I think their future lies in this country. Yeah.
Okay. And then as you conclude, okay, I didn't know that bit about Njahmbi Koikai. I didn't know that you had also played a role in her life. So I'm sure her passing on must have really affected you.
It did, because anytime she would have an interview, she would call my name. I remember that journey. It was a 17.5-hour journey. She had a chest tube. She was frail, but we made it. I remember when we entered the flight, I was also worried, because this was a journalist. This was a public figure, and I was like, I hope nothing happens on our way here, because people maybe have blamed you for maybe you should have done this or done that. But I remember when we entered the flight, it was Kenya Airways, we prayed with her, and I told her, Njahmbi, we are making it. And we came, and God was gracious. We got to Atlanta. She went to the hospital and she had her surgery. And God gave her many more years after that.
Okay.
Yeah, because that was 2018. She just passed on last, was it this month? Yeah.
Yeah, this month. So now looking into the future, what do you hope to do? Because you have a wealth of experience and now you're in America, the most developed country. I don't know whether your experience will be needed here or whether it's needed in Africa.
I think my experience is also changing. I think as age goes by, your body also wants to do something that is slightly different. I'm not young, I'm not vibrant the way I was before. I'm not energetic the way I was before. So, okay, when I got here, I had my diploma in nursing. I did my bachelor's in nursing, and it only takes a year, and it's online. So I did my bachelor's, we graduated last year in October, and I think I want to change my line. Apart from infectious diseases, maybe I want to specialize in geriatrics. Geriatrics are like children, because I was very good with children, and as people grow old, they become like children.
Okay.
They are more interesting and they are nice to work with.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, we wish you all the best.
Yep.
So what is your final parting shot as we conclude?
My final parting shot is, in life you have to take risks, and the risks are what has made my life the way it is. I took a risk with Ebola. I took a risk with COVID-19. I also took a risk to come to this town. In fact, I didn't know there was a town that existed that was called York. I just did an interview and got a hospital, and I came to this town. I knew nobody. So in life, you always have to take risks.
So the final one, it's about careers. Because you know many people, when they are still young, you tell somebody you take a career as a nurse, and many people do not want. What would you tell them?
You will not miss a job when you're a nurse, because there's a shortage of healthcare workers everywhere, be it in Kenya, be it in America, be it in Australia, be it in Dubai, be it in Saudi. So anything to do with medicals, especially nursing, that's the best career someone would pick, because there's a shortage of health workers everywhere. Yeah. So I would encourage our children, I would encourage my brothers and sisters, the young generation, to venture into nursing. Yes.
Yeah, and by the way, I've seen you a lot in the media, you know, in documentaries, having the head of state commendation. Many people may think you are a celebrity. Is that the case?
I came with my medals. I want to tell people something. This is one of the medals I got from the president, this one, and this is the one for African Union. When people see you with this, they think you're rich. This, the way we were given, you put it in your wardrobe. You are not rich. There's nothing that comes with these things. There's no bahasha. People say you are given an envelope with these medals. Nope.
But somebody told me when Uhuru creates like this, you like this, that is money.
No way. And I would really ask my country, because when somebody does something extraordinary, like I remember there was the story of this young girl whose mother was in labor, and she took a boat and crossed the river to take the mother to deliver somewhere. She got a head of state commendation medal. Then people back in the village would think this girl is rich. This girl has some extra money. Nope. It's just a medal that you put in your wardrobe or drawer. I would think maybe they should start like giving them a monthly paycheck for the good work that they have done for that country.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure the authorities in Kenya will listen to that, and hopefully the people in power may do something about it.
Yes.
So thank you so much. I wish you all the best.
Thank you so much, and it was nice talking to you. It was nice you being one of the team of Africans here helping me support my family, and I pray one day that all that I'm going through, God will come through for me, and my husband will join us here, me and my children.
Yeah, we are hoping for that moment, all of us.
Yes.
Yeah. Asante sana. You know, there is one of your sons. He's Masha.
Yes.
Masha always calls me, huyo jamaa anaitwa Bonventure. He's a good friend of mine. Masha asiponiona asikii vizuri.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They are so attached to you, and thank you so much. Yeah.
Asante sana. Thank you, Maggie, for that inspiring conversation. I'm sure somebody has learned something. My name is Bonventure. See you on the other side of Moving Pictures Kenya, where we continue with our journey through America.